The derelict starship drifted in orbit around a dead planet, its hull battered and scorched by millennia of cosmic storms. Its haunting silhouette was silhouetted against the crimson glow of a distant dying star, casting shadows that twisted unnaturally in the void. For Captain Elara Voss and her crew aboard the exploration vessel Eidolon, it was an anomaly they couldn't resist investigating. The ship's signature was ancient, predating humanity's venture into the stars. It was a discovery that could rewrite history, or end them all. Elara, are you seeing this? First Officer Riker's voice trembled as he magnified the image on the ship's main display. The derelict was massive, its architecture unlike anything they had encountered in their years of exploration. It bore no resemblance to known alien designs. Black spires jutted from its surface like frozen screams, and an intricate web of glowing glyphs pulsed faintly across its surface. Definitely not one of ours, Elara muttered, her breath catching. Her hazel eyes narrowed as she leaned closer to the console. Send out a probe. I want scans of that thing before we go near it. The crew watched in silence as a sleek drone launched from Eidolon, its thrusters igniting with a faint blue glow. As it approached the derelict, the ship's glyphs flared to life, and a low-frequency hum reverberated through Eidolon. What the hell was that? Engineer Khalid spun in his chair, his dark curls damp with sweat. The hum was growing louder, like an ancient chant resonating in their skulls. Captain! Riker's voice cut through the growing unease. The probe's telemetry just stopped. No data. No visuals. It's gone. Elara's stomach churned. She wasn't one to scare easily, but something about the ship felt wrong. Ancient. Malevolent. Bring us closer, she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. The Eidolon closed the distance, the derelict looming larger with every passing moment. As they approached, a massive breach in its hull came into view, a jagged wound that bled darkness. It was a perfect entry point, but it also screamed of danger. Prep the EVA suits, Elara said, standing. Riker, Khalid, and Lennox, you're with me. Everyone else, stay aboard and monitor our vitals. If we're not back in 2 hours, leave. Captain, Riker began to protest, but Elara silenced him with a glare. That's an order. The team donned their suits and descended through the airlock, jetting toward the derelict with cautious precision. The breach yawned before them, and as they passed through it, their lights revealed the ship's interior, a labyrinth of twisted corridors and impossible architecture. The walls seemed to shift when unobserved, their surfaces adorned with glyphs that pulsed like a heartbeat. This place isn't just alien, Lennox whispered, her voice crackling over the comms. It's alive. Elara ignored her, her focus fixed on the path ahead. They moved deeper into the ship, their boots clanging softly against the metallic floor. The air was thick with an unseen weight, pressing down on their chests despite the vacuum. Then they found it. At the center of the ship, a massive chamber opened before them, its ceiling vanishing into shadows. In the center stood a monolithic structure, a temple of obsidian and bone. Its spires reached upward like claws, and its surface was inscribed with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift under their gaze. This shouldn't exist, Khalid breathed. The ground beneath them trembled as the glyphs on the temple ignited with a sickly green light. The hum from earlier returned, louder and more insistent. Elara felt it vibrating through her bones, a primal warning to leave. Captain, we've got movement. Lennox shouted, spinning to aim her weapon at the darkness. Shapes emerged from the shadows, figures that were humanoid but wrong. Their limbs were too long, their joints bent backward, and their eyeless faces turned toward the intruders with unerring precision. Open fire, Elara commanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic. The team's plasma rifles lit up the chamber, but the creatures were fast, inhumanly so. One leapt toward Lennox, its claws raking across her suit. She screamed as her oxygen line severed, the creature dragging her into the shadows before anyone could react. Lennox! No! Khalid fired wildly, his shots ricocheting off the walls. Focus! Elara shouted, grabbing his arm. We need to retreat, now. But the temple had other plans. The chamber's walls began to close, reshaping themselves into a maze of shifting corridors. The glyphs pulsed faster, their light blinding. The hum became a deafening roar. "Rika, find us an exit," Ilara barked as they sprinted through the narrowing passages. "I'm trying." Rika's voice was frantic as he scanned their surroundings. "These corridors, this ship, it's changing. I can't map it." A piercing scream echoed behind them, cutting through the cacophony. Khalid was gone, his discarded weapons spinning on the floor. "Keep moving," Ilara yelled, dragging Rika forward. They burst into another chamber, smaller but just as alien. At its center stood an altar, and on it lay an object, a pulsating sphere of black and green energy. The glyphs on the walls converged toward it, their light feeding its glow. "What the hell is that?" Rika gasped, his eyes wide. Ilara didn't know, but every instinct screamed that it was the key to their survival, or their doom. Without thinking, she reached out and grabbed it. The moment her fingers touched the sphere, the world shattered. She was no longer in the chamber but standing in the void, surrounded by stars and screams. A vision consumed her mind, images of a race long dead, their screams echoing as they were consumed by the temple's horrors. The sphere was their prison, their curse, their last desperate attempt to warn anyone who found it. "Ilara!" Rika's voice pulled her back. She was on the floor, the sphere clutched to her chest. The chamber was collapsing around them, the walls folding inward like a black hole devouring itself. "Go!" she shouted, hauling herself to her feet. They ran, the temple's horrors clawing at their heels. The sphere pulsed with every step, guiding them through the chaos. Finally, they reached the breach, the cold embrace of space a welcome relief. "Ilara, we're losing you." The voice of Eidolon's comms officer crackled in her helmet. "Get us out of here," she screamed as they launched themselves toward the ship. The derelict groaned behind them, its structure collapsing as the temple consumed itself. They barely made it aboard Eidolon before the derelict imploded, a silent explosion that sent shockwaves through the void. Ilara collapsed onto the deck, the sphere still in her hands. It pulsed faintly, its light dim but alive. "What the hell just happened?" Rika panted, his face pale. Ilara didn't answer. She couldn't shake the vision, the screams, the warning. Whatever the sphere was, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And she had brought it aboard. The pulse of the sphere had an almost hypnotic rhythm as it sat secured in the containment field in Eidolon's research bay. Ilara stood before it, her face bathed in the faint green glow as her mind replayed the horrors they had encountered. She clenched her fists, trying to suppress the visions, the screams of the ancient race, the shifting walls, the creatures that defied nature. The weight of the sphere's presence was suffocating, but she couldn't bring herself to look away. Behind her, Rika entered the room, his face still pale and his eyes hollow from their escape. "You shouldn't be alone with that thing," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Ilara glanced at him over her shoulder. "I don't think it matters where I am. I can feel it, in my head. Like it's whispering something I can't quite understand." Rika's jaw tightened. "We should destroy it. Whatever this thing is, it's connected to that nightmare of a ship. We barely made it out alive, and I'm not eager to see what happens if it wakes up." "We don't know what it is," Ilara countered, though her voice carried more doubt than conviction. "And if it's a warning, destroying it could erase the only chance we have to understand what's out there." Rika opened his mouth to argue, but the ship shuddered violently, cutting him off. The lights flickered, and the hum of the engines faltered before stabilizing again. "Khalid, report." Ilara barked into her comms. In the engineering bay, Khalid's voice crackled through the speakers. "Captain, we've got a problem. The power core's fluctuating. Something's drawing energy from it, massive amounts." Ilara's eyes darted to the sphere. Its glow had intensified, the pulsing now faster and more erratic. "It's the sphere," she said grimly. "We need to eject it," Rika said, stepping back from the containment field. "Now, before it takes the whole ship with it." Before Ilara could respond, the sphere's light flared, filling the room with an eerie green radiance. Both she and Rika stumbled back as a projection erupted from the sphere, a swirling mass of shapes and images that coalesced into a towering figure. The figure was humanoid but distorted, its form composed of shifting glyphs and tendrils of light. Its face was a void, a blank canvas that seemed to consume light. When it spoke, its voice was 1,000 whispers layered into one, echoing in their minds as much as in the room. "You are not worthy." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She instinctively reached for her sidearm but froze as the figure's gaze, if it could be called that, locked onto her. What do you want?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound authoritative. "This vessel. This crew. They will serve as the first." "The first for what?" Rika snapped, stepping in front of Ilara protectively. The figure tilted its head as if amused. "The reclamation. Your kind opened the way. Now, the temple awakens." Before either of them could react, the projection vanished, and the sphere emitted a shockwave that sent them both sprawling. Alarms blared across the ship as systems overloaded, and the containment field around the sphere collapsed. Ilara scrambled to her feet, helping Riker up. "Engineering, status report," she shouted into her comms. Cullard's panicked voice came through. "Captain, we've lost containment on the power core. It's overloading, I can't stop it." Ilara cursed under her breath. "We need to jettison the sphere. Riker, get to the airlock." As they raced through the corridors, the ship continued to shudder violently, the green light from the sphere seeping into every corner. Crew members stumbled out of their quarters, shouting questions and warnings, but Ilara didn't stop. The sphere's influence was spreading, and if they didn't act fast, it would destroy them all. When they reached the airlock, Cullard's voice crackled again. "Captain, wait. There's something else." His words were cut off by a deafening roar that reverberated through the ship. Ilara and Riker froze as a rift tore open in the bulkhead, spilling shadows into the corridor. From the darkness emerged one of the creatures they had encountered in the temple, its twisted limbs scraping against the walls as it advanced. "Go!" Ilara shouted, raising her plasma rifle and firing at the creature. The bolt struck its torso, but the creature barely flinched, its eyeless face turning toward her with a predatory focus. Riker hesitated for only a moment before sprinting toward the airlock. "Buy me some time." Ilara gritted her teeth, continuing to fire as the creature lunged. She dodged to the side, its claws slicing through the air where she had stood moments before. The ship's alarms and the sounds of distant screams added to the chaos, but she forced herself to stay focused. "Riker, tell me you're almost there," she yelled, narrowly avoiding another swipe from the creature. "I'm working on it," he shouted back, his voice strained. The creature's movements were unnaturally fluid, its elongated limbs bending in impossible ways as it closed the distance. Ilara fired again, this time aiming for its legs. The bolt struck true, and the creature stumbled, giving her a brief moment to breathe. "Now would be a good time, Riker." "I've got it," he called out as the sphere's containment unit detached from the wall and slid into the airlock. Ilara backed toward him, still firing at the creature as it regained its footing. "Eject it." Riker slammed the controls, and the airlock doors sealed shut. A moment later, the sphere was launched into space, its glow fading as it disappeared into the void. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech, its form disintegrating into black smoke that was sucked into the vacuum through the breach it had created. The ship fell silent, save for the distant hum of the stabilizing engines. Ilara leaned against the wall, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Riker stood beside her, his face pale but resolute. "Is it over?" he asked. Ilara didn't answer. She stared out the viewport, her eyes narrowing as the sphere drifted farther away. For a moment, she thought they had succeeded. But then the sphere pulsed again, and from the void emerged a massive structure, another temple, far larger than the derelict ship they had encountered. Its spires glowed with the same sickly green light, and from its depths, countless shadows began to stir. "No," Ilara whispered, dread settling in her gut. "It's just beginning." The temple loomed in the void, its jagged spires stretching impossibly far into the blackness, pulsing with that now familiar green glow. From the viewports of the Eidolon, the crew could see it clearly, a monstrous construct of alien architecture, radiating power and malevolence. It dwarfed the derelict they'd explored earlier, and from its depths emerged hundreds, no, thousands, of shadowy figures. The air in the ship felt heavier, as if the temple's very presence was suffocating them. In the war room, Elara slammed her hands on the console, her voice commanding but edged with fear. Rika, Khalid, give me options. How do we destroy it? Khalid, sweat pouring down his face, stared at the holographic display of the temple. Captain, this isn't something we can fight with our ship. That thing, it's pulling energy from somewhere beyond our understanding. It could crush us like a tin can. Rika crossed his arms, his jaw clenched. We barely survived the last encounter, and now it's multiplying. Even if we had the entire Terran fleet backing us, I'm not sure it'd be enough. That's not good enough, Elara snapped. There's always a way. Khalid, scan it. Find me a weakness, a power source, anything we can exploit. Khalid hesitated but nodded, turning back to his station. The hologram zoomed in on the temple, revealing its intricate design, geometric patterns that seemed to defy logic, shifting and rearranging as if alive. Elara paced the room, her mind racing. The shadowy figures were still emerging, growing larger and more distinct. She could see them now, humanoid creatures with grotesque, elongated limbs and featureless faces, their forms flickering like static. They moved with unnatural grace, heading toward the ship in an unrelenting wave. The intercom crackled. Captain, we've got hostiles approaching fast, shouted Lieutenant Brandt from the bridge. They are moving straight for us. Elara bolted toward the bridge, Rika and Khalid following close behind. When they arrived, the viewport was filled with the horrifying sight of the creatures, now numbering in the hundreds, swarming toward the Eidolon. Their bodies shimmered with the same green glow as the temple, and their speed was unnerving. Raise shields and prepare all weapons, Elara ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos. I want every turret firing as soon as they're in range. The crew scrambled to obey, the hum of the ship's weapon systems coming online a small comfort in the face of such overwhelming odds. Shields at maximum, Brandt reported. They are closing in, 20 seconds to impact. Fire everything, Elara commanded. The Eidolon's turrets roared to life, unleashing a barrage of plasma bolts and railgun slugs. The void lit up with explosions as the projectiles struck the incoming swarm, obliterating dozens of creatures in seconds. But for every one that fell, two more seemed to take its place. They're adapting, Khalid said, his voice tight. The ones in the back are shifting their forms, making it harder for the weapons to lock on. Then we need to outthink them, Elara replied. Brandt, deploy the drones. Set them to self-destruct in the densest clusters. The lieutenant nodded, launching a swarm of combat drones from the ship's underbelly. The small, agile machines darted toward the creatures, detonating in fiery bursts that momentarily thinned their numbers. But the creatures kept coming. One reached the Eidolon, slamming into the shield with a force that made the entire ship shudder. The shield flared brightly, holding against the impact, but it wouldn't last forever. Shields down to 80%, Brandt reported. Elara clenched her fists. We need to buy more time. Khalid, did you find anything in the scans? Khalid's fingers flew over the console. The temple's core, it's emitting the same energy signature as the sphere. If we can disrupt it, we might be able to shut the whole thing down. How? Riker asked, his tone sharp. We can't even get close to that thing with these creatures in the way. Elara's mind raced. What if we don't go to the core? What if we send the sphere back to it? The room fell silent. That's insane, Riker said. We barely got rid of that thing, and now you want to bring it back. If the sphere and the temple are connected, then reuniting them might overload the system, Elara argued. It's a gamble, but it's the only shot we've got. Riker looked like he wanted to argue, but another impact rocked the ship, sending sparks flying from the consoles. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. But if this goes wrong, we're all dead. Khalid, retrieve the sphere from the containment logs and guide us through the process, Elara ordered. As Khalid worked, Elara turned to Brandt. Keep firing. We need to hold them off long enough to make this work. The crew fought valiantly, the ship's weapons blazing as they tried to hold the swarm at bay. The creatures were relentless, their forms shifting and adapting with each passing moment. The Eidolon's shields continued to weaken, the ship groaning under the strain. Finally, Culled's voice came through. I've got the sphere's signal. Recalibrating the tractor beam to retrieve it now. The ship's engines roared as it maneuvered closer to the sphere, which still floated near the temple. The creatures seemed to sense what was happening, their movements becoming more frantic as they surged toward the Eidolon. Shields at 40%. Brant shouted. Hold them off. Ilara yelled, gripping the console as the ship shuddered again. The tractor beam locked onto the sphere, pulling it toward the ship. As it drew closer, the green glow intensified, the pulsing rhythm syncing with the temple. It's working, Culled said. The energy levels are spiking. Now what? Riker asked, his rifle at the ready as he watched the creatures clawing at the viewport. We send it back, Ilara replied. With the sphere secured, Culled redirected the tractor beam, aiming it directly at the temple's core. The sphere floated out into the void, its light growing brighter and more erratic as it approached the temple. The creatures screamed, a sound that reverberated through the ship and into their very minds. They writhed and convulsed, their forms disintegrating into smoke as the sphere neared the core. And then, the temple erupted in a blinding explosion of green light. The shockwave sent the Eidolon spiraling, its systems failing as the crew clung to whatever they could grab. When the light faded, the temple was gone. The creatures were gone. All that remained was silence. Ilara pulled herself to her feet, her vision swimming as she looked around the bridge. The crew was battered but alive, the ship damaged but intact. Did we do it? Riker asked, his voice hoarse. Ilara stared out the viewport at the empty void where the temple had been. She wanted to believe it was over, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. We're alive, she said finally. For now, that's enough. The Eidolon drifted in the aftermath of the temple's annihilation. The stars returned to their natural brilliance, the green glow of the malevolent structure gone as if it had never existed. The ship's bridge was eerily quiet except for the faint crackle of damaged systems and the labored breathing of the crew. Ilara wiped blood from her temple and surveyed her people. They were alive, but the scars of the battle, physical and emotional, were etched into every face. Culled was furiously working on the console, trying to stabilize the ship's power grid. Riker was reloading his plasma rifle, the tension in his shoulders refusing to ease. Lieutenant Brant sat slumped in his chair, his fingers trembling as he gripped the controls. We survived, Riker muttered, breaking the silence. I can't believe it. That thing, it's really gone. Ilara wasn't so sure. Her instincts screamed that it wasn't over. The temple's destruction had been too easy, an ancient entity like that didn't vanish without leaving a mark. Status report, Ilara ordered, her voice commanding despite the exhaustion weighing her down. Culled shook his head, not looking up. We're barely holding together. Shields are fried, weapons systems are down, and the reactors running on backup power. If anything else hits us, we're done for. Can we jump out of here? Not yet, Culled replied. The FTL drive is offline. I'll need at least an hour to get it operational again. Ilara nodded. An hour felt like an eternity after what they'd just faced. Keep working. Everyone else, stay sharp. I don't want any surprises. As she said the words, the ship shuddered violently, throwing her against the console. Alarms blared, and red lights bathed the bridge in an ominous glow. What now? Riker shouted, gripping the railing to steady himself. Culled's face went pale as he stared at his screen. Captain, something's happening, where the temple was. Ilara turned to the viewport, her heart sinking. The empty void where the temple had been was now swirling with an inky black vortex. It twisted and churned, growing larger with every passing second. From its depths, shapes began to emerge, massive, jagged constructs of metal and stone. Ships, but unlike anything they'd ever seen. Incoming vessels! Brant yelled, his hands flying over the controls. They're heading straight for us. The bridge erupted into chaos. Ilara barked orders, trying to maintain control as the alien ships closed in. They were grotesque, organic and mechanical at once, bristling with weaponry that pulsed with green energy. Can we fight them? She asked Culled, though she already knew the answer. He shook his head. Our weapons are offline, and even if they weren't, We don't stand a chance against those things. Then we run, Elara said, gripping the edge of her console. Get that FTL drive working, Colored. Whatever it takes. The alien ships opened fire. Bolts of green energy slammed into the Eidolon, shaking the ship to its core. Sparks flew as consoles overloaded, and the crew scrambled to keep the ship from falling apart. Shields are completely gone, Brandt reported. Hull integrity at 60% and dropping fast. Elara gritted her teeth. Evasive maneuvers. Keep us alive, Brandt. The Eidolon weaved through the onslaught, dodging as much fire as it could. But the alien ships were relentless, their weapons tearing through the ship's defenses like paper. FTL drive is still offline. Colored shouted, frustration and fear in his voice. I need more time. Elara's mind raced. They couldn't hold out much longer. Their only hope was to delay the enemy long enough for Colored to get the drive operational. But how? Her eyes fell on the sphere, now lying inert in its containment unit. The alien artifact that had caused all of this, the key to the temple, the beacon that had drawn the horrors to them. Colored, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Can we use the sphere? He looked at her, confused. Use it? For what? As a weapon, she said. It's connected to these things, right? If we overload it, maybe we can take them out. Colored hesitated. That's possible. But we'd have to rig it to the reactor, and if it goes wrong, we're dead either way, Elara interrupted. Do it. Colored nodded, his hands shaking as he began rerouting power to the sphere. The crew worked frantically, the ship groaning under the relentless assault. Captain, Brandt called out, his voice tight. They are charging some kind of superweapon. If they hit us with that, we're done. Elara's heart pounded. Colored, how much longer? Almost there, he said, his fingers flying over the controls. Just a few more seconds. The alien ships began to converge, their weapons glowing brighter as they prepared to deliver the killing blow. Now, Colored! Elara shouted. With a final keystroke, Colored activated the sphere. It pulsed with a blinding light, brighter and more intense than before. The energy surged through the ship, and for a moment, it felt like the Eidolon would tear itself apart. Then the light erupted outward, a shockwave of pure energy that engulfed the alien ships. The crew watched in awe as the grotesque vessels disintegrated, their forms dissolving into ash. The vortex began to collapse, the blackness imploding on itself until it vanished entirely. The void was silent once more. The crew of the Eidolon sat in stunned silence, the realization of their survival slowly sinking in. The sphere, Colored said, staring at the now destroyed containment unit. It's gone. Elara exhaled, the weight of the ordeal finally hitting her. Good, she said. Let it stay gone. The ship was in ruins, but they were alive. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the stars were just stars again. Elara sank into her chair, exhaustion overtaking her. They had survived the Temple of Horrors, but she knew the galaxy would never be the same. The temple's secrets, its power, they had touched something ancient and terrible, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't finished with them. Set a course for home, she said quietly. And pray we never find anything like that again. As the Eidolon limped away from the battlefield, the crew couldn't help but feel a lingering dread. The temple was gone, but its memory would haunt them forever. And somewhere, in the dark reaches of space, other horrors waited to be discovered.